you like to make and a statement about what's going on and everything. We're ready to get started. And thank you all for coming. Please take this back to your various clubs and your various chapters. Make sure to tell them that they need to stay informed about what's happening, whether or not they attend events like this or not, that they really need to stay active in what they do. So.
Well, I appreciate y'all coming out today. It's great to be here, and I'm really happy to see that y'all are coming out and are interested in finding out about what's going on here in our community, specifically locally. We see a lot of news on a national level, and we see a lot of things that are happening around the world and around the country, but sometimes that news happens here. And I wish I could say that it's happening right now for good reasons, that we're being recognized for great things, but we're not. We are in the national spotlight right now for some pretty negative stuff around voting and the accessibility of voting. I thought that it was interesting. We were just talking about how votes were suppressed in the 30s and how people weren't able to vote because of all of these barriers to voting. And I think that we're seeing barriers to voting being put back into place. When we look at legislation that's coming out of Raleigh, coming out of the Capitol, the General Assembly, we're seeing legislation that has no purpose but to make voters less likely to vote. We see voter ID law that targets students, especially targets minority communities. When there's a voter ID that is a law that's put into place, and your student ID, which is a state-issued card, a state-issued ID, and they don't want to recognize that as an ID, that to me is an attack on students. That's an attack on me, and that's an attack on y'all, and that upsets me. When we look at what's going on here more locally, this is more of a two-pronged issue when it comes to elections. There is voting that happens early, and there's voting that happens on election day. The early voting is an issue that is controlled by, well, both of them are issues that are controlled by the Board of Elections. There are certain dates, times, and ways to do things that are controlled by the general statute, the law of the state. But locally, there is an early voting plan that's submitted. And that early voting plan controls when early voting is, where early voting is, and there was recently a changeover in the governorship. The Republicans got control of the governorship, and thus the Board of Elections changed from having 2 Democrats to 2 Republicans on it. And there have been changes to election law. This is a simple fact. I don't think this is a partisan issue. I want to preempt this and say this isn't a partisan issue. This is something that is a voting rights issue. It's something that no matter how you come to vote on early voting or election day, it's something that will affect you. But these Republicans took control of the Board of Elections, and they decided to change the early voting plan first. And that early voting plan, it was 2-to-1, 2 Republicans to the 1 Democrat, decided to move early voting off campus. This is the first time in 4 years. In 2008, students were given the chance to vote on campus. 2008? They were given the chance to vote on campus, and they've been able to do it ever since. It's been one of the most popular polling locations on campus. If you're interested, I can give you specific figures afterwards. But when you look at a per day number of votes, this building is the most popular voting location in the county. And when you look at all that, and then you look at the fact that they decided to move early voting off campus, that to me strikes me as strange. That strikes me as an ulterior motive. And I'm concerned for the reasoning behind that. And the only thing I can possibly see is an attempt to target a group of people. That being us, that being students. And I'm very concerned by that. When we appealed that decision, it actually happened on Tuesday, to the State Board of Elections in Raleigh. There was a great group of people that went out, and there were a lot more that like y'all, that are watching at home to see what's going on. And the State Board denied the request to have early voting on campus, saying that 1 location is adequate. Well, I don't know about y'all, but I would not like adequacy. I would like exceptionalism. I believe that we should be encouraging voters, not saying that what we have is adequate. So that's early voting. There will be no early voting on campus, but there will be early voting at the administration building on King Street. It's across from Mellow Mushroom. Early voting begins October 17th, and it'll last until the Friday before the election. It's really important that we get out and we vote, and we encourage everybody else to vote. Because on election day, they have also changed some of the locations, or the location for that. Y'all might have heard about the super precinct that they established. It was the third largest in the state, I believe. Considering all of the larger cities we have, they still decided that it would be best to put one super precinct here in Little Old Boone. And that precinct would have 9,300 voters to go into one location that has 28 parking spots and has a capacity of 125 people, according to the fire marshal, for the entire building. That's not the voting enclosure, that's the building. It would be impossible, not just improbable, but impossible for 9,300 voters to vote in that one location. That, to me, again, and it's at a location that's not accessible via sidewalks. There are no sidewalks there. There was not an apple cart stop there. You have to walk on the side of the road with a little dirt pathway that's about yay big. And that, to me, is concerning. I think that the motivation behind that is concerning. I don't understand why you would ever want to combine 3 precincts to make the third largest precinct in the state. It doesn't make sense. There's no legitimate reason for it, except voter suppression. And that does very much worry me.
So, Ian covered that great. There are a few other aspects going on right now, but really what happened is about the beginning of August, I think the first or second week of August, our new Board of Elections, which is a Republican majority, called a special meeting with 3 days' notice. During that 3 days' notice, they did not release any material to the public about what they were intending to talk about, what they intended to do, and the changes that they intended to make. Once we arrived at the meeting, there were a ton of people who decided to show up. At first, they were fighting us on trying to move the location. They wanted to keep maybe 10 people in the room and not let the other folks see what was going on. Eventually, the fire marshal had to actually evacuate the room to allow for people to actually show up to the meeting. And of course, they bombarded us with these other changes. They moved polling sites away from where people actually live. There's a precinct called New River 3. Some of you probably live in New River 3 because it has a lot of student apartments in it. So what we're talking about now is Town of Boone elections. They moved the polling site outside of the Town of Boone. So you have to go vote for Town of Boone officials outside of the Town of Boone now. And that was a start to what they introduced here on Wednesday, I believe, which was a change to the actual campus election day site. So traditionally, what could happen is as students, we have a Boone 2 polling site here. We had a Boone 2 polling site here in the student union. If you didn't know where your polling site was, or perhaps you were confused about how to get to your polling site, you could actually vote provisionally here on campus and your vote would count. They saw that and immediately changed that polling location from the student union to Legends. That actually passed yesterday, so now instead of voting in the student union, it's at Legends. Now there are some really important factors there. On the face of it, it sounds like a bit of a win because at least we have voting on campus, but it's not ADA accessible. It was grandfathered in because of the age of the building. So the grade on the ramp to get into Legends is too tall for a wheelchair to actually get up the ramp. So if you're a handicapped voter and you live in Boone 2, you cannot vote in your election day precinct. That's just plain fact. We were discussing yesterday with the folks in charge of the student union as well as Legends, Dave Robertson, who's the director of student programs here. He insisted that we use the student union because Legends tends to flood up to 3 inches. It has no emergency lighting, so if the power got cut, it would be pitch black. There's no windows in the room, so if your ballot happened to be in there, we have no idea what happens to it after that. There's no 24-hour security to ensure that the ballots are safe and where they need to be. Now, our proposal to them was that we stick with the student union in the brand new Linville Falls room, which is excellent for this. It was almost actually built for early voting. 75 parking spots, fully ADA accessible. It actually exceeds ADA standards. And it would allow all the students to come to one location and vote. We were even fighting for a transfer location. It was a win-win for everybody. Even the Republicans on the board said, it's a perfect location. It works for everything we've got, but we actually prefer Legends. So it was pretty obvious to me at that point that we weren't going to be able to work with them to make sure that students had the right to vote on campus. They were going to go out of their way to make sure that it was very difficult for you to actually cast a ballot. And the reason that is because the municipals are actually the last big battle that we have to protect progressive values in the area. And students tend to vote the way they think, and they don't really like that. They want you to not vote at all. We've registered over 1,000 voters on campus. We registered over 7,000 in 2012. We really want you guys to be able to have full and unblocked access to vote. We want you to have the easiest way to vote by just coming on the student union. Whether you live in an apartment, 5 miles away from here, or whether you live on campus in a dorm, I want you to be able to cast a ballot in the easiest possible location. I think that the the State Board of Elections was probably looking at basic numbers, and I agree with it. We probably should have had one location. I don't agree that it should be where it's at. I think the one location should be here on campus. It's the most populated, useful polling location we've had. In fact, in 2008, more people voted in the student union than any other polling location in Watauga County, which is just an amazing number. I mean, it's really mind-blowing. So I really hope that we can end up getting this decision rejected by the State Board of Elections Executive Director. She has the ultimate decision here, and she can end up rejecting it. Then we at least have Election Day voting on campus. After that, we're going to keep fighting to keep early voting on campus, because I think that the majority of us prefer to vote early because we can vote at any given time. It doesn't have to be a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. It can be Tuesday or Thursday. Any time from 10 to 5 o'clock. It's just so easy. And I think that having easy access to the ballot's the thing we're here to fight for.
Listening to Jesse and myself talk, it seems very negative. And I don't mean to sound like that. I think it's important to remember that, although a lot of the stuff that's coming out right now is targeted at students and targeted at making it more difficult to vote, I think that it's our responsibility and the responsibility of y'all as concerned community citizens, as students who care about this community, to go out and vote and encourage your friends to go out and vote. I know when I go to vote, I bring 20 friends with me. I make it an event. We go out and we get lunch, and then we go out and vote. And I would encourage y'all to do the same. I would encourage y'all to not take take this as a sign of being defeated, but take this as a galvanizing action. Take this as something that you realize that people are trying to stop you from voting, and you have the opportunity to vote still, and you should take advantage of that. I think that is the most important thing I've learned from this, and I would encourage y'all to take that from it as well.
I'll quickly piggyback on that. We're here to fight. That's what me and Ian are for. And we formed, with a coalition of people, the Voting Rights Task Force, which is going to fight back not only the Board of Elections decisions, student voting, voter ID, all of the different blockades to voting. We're here to fight that. We're forming that. We're hoping to get community members. We're hoping to get students involved with that. We're going to register voters. We're going to show up to the meetings. We're going to make sure that our voice is heard, because that's the only way to make sure that you're represented, is to stand up and have your voice heard.
Thank you so much. Can we all give them a round of applause? One of our first questions is, one interesting thing that you said was that early voting has been on campus since 2008, which is obviously the year that President Obama was elected. Do you think that since then, since the approval of gay marriage and things like that, tend to make the Board of Elections kind of conjure up an agenda to impact students who are voting Democrat?
I think it's very clear that the only area that they're manipulating right now is the area that votes heavily Democrat. They're not messing with any other polling locations. We have one polling location right now that has exactly 85 registered voters in it. It's hardly ever used. All of those voters usually vote early, and they refuse to close that location because every single one of those 85 registered voters votes Republican. I don't think this is a partisan issue. I think those 85 people should have the right to vote in their precinct, and I think we should have the right to vote in our precinct as well. It's not partisan, it's just voter access, plain and simple. But yes, I do think that this is an attack on people who tend to vote liberal.
Also, what percentage in total votes in Watauga are accounted for in the student body here on campus?
So that's a very interesting number because it fluctuates. We're looking at a municipal election right now. We have 9% turnout in municipal elections because they're just very kind of low turnout elections. A lot of people aren't educated about the candidates. But if we look at a year like 2008 and 2012, about 45% of the vote is a student vote. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a statistician, and he works with a lot of voting patterns. He said by the year 2014, students will make up the majority of the vote in Watauga County, which is amazing. I'm really proud of the amount of students who get registered to vote and actually, exercise their rights.
What is the percentage of Republicans to Democrats on the Watauga of elections?
So it's 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and then if you go to the state board of elections, which is the one that ruled on the appeal, it's a total of 5 members, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats.
Okay.
And it changes with the governorship. So if the governor turns Democrat, the majority goes to Democrat. If the governor's Republican, it goes with Republican.
I guess you can kind of do this afterwards. How can we contact the voters task force? Should we just come to you?
Yes, if y'all are interested, what I would like to do is pass around a sheet and get y'all's information, and I can definitely give y'all mine. And we're going to set a meeting date for, I believe, next week, and try to get together, talk about what we can all do as individuals and as groups to make voting more accessible and to encourage students to go out and exercise our right to vote. But definitely we'll pass around the form at the end of this, and y'all are welcome to sign up, and I'm happy to give up my contact information afterwards as well.
And in conjunction with that, are you all involved in, let's say, like Tennessee and Virginia, like the surrounding states that could possibly be affected by the voters' suppression laws?
So what we actually intended to do with this is build a model this year that we can export next year into the region. We really wanted to use this unique situation to build some kind of unique structure that would allow us to go to places like Tennessee, go to places like Virginia, and show them how we did it, how we successfully fought back. We recognize that student clubs have their own unique value systems and their own unique interests in the community, and we want to be kind of a vehicle for them to reach those locations politically. We know how to organize in certain areas, but you guys know how to organize your groups better than anybody. And you guys know what issues are kind of hot to you, and we want to make sure that you guys are organizing around those issues, and we're just here to listen and help.
Interesting question. It says what rationale or justification was given for the many changes that occurred, i.e. The reasons given by the Board of Elections for the way things were voted.
Well, when it came to early voting, the reasoning behind it was that there was not a need for it. I certainly disagree, but they've used the past 2 municipal elections as reasons, which are low turnout elections, as reasons why there does not need to be an early voting location here. Now, y'all might not know this, but in 2011, the last municipal election, there were 3 seats up. There were 3 town council seats up for election, and there were 3 people running for them. So there were no contested elections. So if you use that as your gauge, then yes, there was low turnout. But I don't know many people that go out and vote when there's no competition. I mean, I did, but I think that it was kind of a waste of time. There really wasn't a purpose to it. Everybody I voted for got elected. But, it didn't do much for me. As opposed to this year, where we are now having one of the most contested municipal elections we've ever seen. There are 3 candidates right now that are declared for mayor, that are going to be on the ballot for mayor. There are 6 candidates. There are 4 candidates for mayor. There are 3 candidates that will be on the ballot. There's somebody writing a write-in campaign for mayor. But there are 6 candidates for 3 town council seats. So, I mean, this is a very, very important election, probably one of the most important that we will see while students here, and certainly the most important municipal I've seen while being active in politics.
So I'll talk a little bit about Legends because I loved their rationale for Legends. It was because they thought students would be confused about where they vote in the student union. They thought we wouldn't know where to go, so they should move it to Legends because that's the easiest place for us to figure out. They didn't want to confuse us. Luke Egger said himself that there are so many doors into the student union, how could they possibly know where to vote? I mean, I'm not making this crap up. This is actually what he said. He also argued that the student union wasn't easy for community members to access. But now that we have 75 new parking spaces that are going to be exclusively for early voting, that was kind of a null and void point to me. And then he eventually said that both locations were equal, the student union and Legends. He just preferred Legends. And I can't see any legitimate rationale other than just kind of outright voter suppression there, but that's my opinion.
It's funny you should say that. Somebody asked, well, I guess you didn't consider all things that seem to suck about Legends. Isn't Legends better than nothing on campus at all?
Absolutely, and I've talked to Ian about this a lot. I agree that Legends is better than nothing, but I'm kind of sick of fighting for something that's better than nothing. I'm ready for us to have full and equal kind of rights compared to the community members here. People who vote in areas 30 miles from here should have the same exact voting rights that we do here. It's just not fair to judge two groups of people differently. So yes, I agree, but I think we could do better.
I think it's interesting. They describe this plan as, the exact words within the law where they described it as adequate. And I don't believe that our ability to vote should be adequate. I believe it should be the best. It should be exceptional. We should be encouraging votes, not making it adequately available. And I think that that's definitely an issue, and that's something that...
At some point they considered literacy tests adequate for voting. I mean, that's just fact. I don't consider that adequate, but I'm like I said, I'm just sick and tired of trying to find something that's better than nothing.
Yeah. Someone asked, is this a hot constitutional issue? How is the town of Boone is this a hot constitutional issue, number one? And then also, how is the town of Boone able to challenge constitutional rights to vote, and how do we successfully challenge this issue?
I'll tell you what's really interesting about this. The town of Boone actually pays for these elections. These are for town of Boone elections. There are no, the Watauga County residents who don't live in the town obviously cannot vote in this election. The town pays for them fully, but it's all put on by the county. The county board of elections are in charge of this. And the town, which is controlled by all Democrats, they have objected to this very, very, very openly. They've written resolutions against this. They've passed them unanimously. They have requested information about being able to do elections on their own because the county is alienating voters. The mayor of Boone, Loretta Clausen, went to the State Board of Elections meeting trying to speak, and she was not allowed to. She went to the local board meeting and tried to speak, but she was not allowed to. They pay for these elections. The town of Boone, us as residents, pay for these elections, and she was not allowed to speak on behalf of the elections that they're supposed to be in charge of. So this is not the town of Boone, this is the county, but it is definitely a constitutional issue in my mind. It's our right to vote. That being said, there is specific law that allows a county board of elections to decide which polling locations and which methods of voter access are most appropriate for the area. And it certainly is shady. I don't think that there's anybody who wouldn't say that this is shady. But because this has been granted to the counties by law, they are allowed to make this decision. So
I'm not breaking any news here because this has kind of already been released to the public, but Kathleen Campbell, who is the lone Democratic member on the Board of Elections, has announced that a team of attorneys have been assembled to look at any and all possible legal angles here and sue where possible. So there are folks looking into this. Obviously, me and Ian aren't privy to exactly what they're looking at because we're not represented by them, but I would be very surprised to not see a lawsuit come down the pike very soon.
Someone asked, you mentioned before you formed a task force to fight against voter reform. So what specific actions are you taking locally, and how can students get involved in this?
That was probably the best question I've had all day. I love that. So what we want to do with the Voting Rights Task Force is really kind of advanced. First of all, the most important thing that we can do, is register voters and turn them out to vote regardless of the location, because that ensures that we have the representation we want. The second thing we need to do is to make sure that as groups, as organizations, that we're reaching out and telling the Board of Elections, telling the State Board of Elections that we're not happy with what's going on right now. Specifically today, You can log on to Facebook, and I believe it's on the Watauga County Democratic Party Facebook page. You can send a letter to Kim Stratch, who has the ultimate decision to move the polling location back on campus. If she does not sign that resolution, we will have voting on campus on election day. So
In the student union.
in the student union, yeah, not in Legends. So sending her a letter immediately is something you can do today. Of course, in the coming weeks, we want to make sure that we're able to quickly disseminate information to students about what's going on in their communities. That when we have the voter ID come down the pike, and it has passed, it's law now, it's not going to come into effect until a staggered term of 2014 and 2016. Making sure that folks who do not meet those ID requirements go down to the DMV and get the ID they need to vote. Making sure they know what the process is, making sure they're comfortable with absentee voting if that's what they choose, walking students through the process of how to continue to cast a ballot regardless of the blockades that might be there. And I also think it's very important that we hold our elected officials accountable for what they're doing. So staging events to let them know that we're paying attention to what they're doing. Staging press conferences to show that students are standing in solidarity against what's going on right now. Making sure that clubs who have specific interests have their interest voiced to the State Board of Elections Board, whoever they may be looking to talk to. And then Ian can talk a little bit more about what we're doing in the field, maybe.
Yeah, we definitely are out registering voters. Jesse mentioned 1,000 voter registrations. That's 1,000 voter registrations within the past 3 weeks. I don't know if y'all have registered to vote, but we have had a lot of people do it. We've had a lot of people decide that they want to be a part of the voting community here at Appalachian and Boone and in Watauga County. We are going into classrooms talking to students about voting, why it's so important to register, why it's so important to go out and vote. I don't know about y'all, a lot of people don't vote in municipal elections. I know there have been elections that I haven't voted in, and I think that that's a mistake. It's a mistake that I've made, and it's a mistake that a lot of us make. But municipal elections are hugely important to us, and explaining that to the people around us. Making sure they know why it's so important to vote in this election and in every election. And I think the biggest reason to me is because of what we're seeing right now. When they say that there's not turnout enough to warrant a location on campus, that scares me, and I definitely want to fight that. I want them to know that we are watching and we are voting, more importantly.
And when we come together as a coalition, we're a lot more powerful than we are as an individual. So if we bring together groups who are interested in this kind of election reform and fighting blockades to voting, then I think our voice collaboratively is much more powerful than me and Ian's single voice could possibly be. I want to make sure that anybody who sits on that voting rights task force can pick up the phone and call any elected official they want and have an answer on the other line.
And just for the sake of time, we're going to be asking three more questions.
Fantastic.
So the first one is, even though students may not be as aggressive in the protest or in speaking up, what can we as everyday students do to make sure that our campus is kind of aware on the situation that has been happening?
So I think, an underappreciated form of communication is social media. You'd be surprised at how many folks are paying attention to what we're saying on social media, and making sure that if you've got the message right, you know what you're talking about, that you're sharing it with your friends. That's so easy to do. It's something you can do at 3 o'clock in the morning after you're done with your homework. Making sure that that message is shared, making sure that your professors are aware of what you're doing, registering your classes to vote. I'll let Ian talk a little bit more about some other things that you can do that are kind of less on the aggressive side. But when you're a member of a campus organization, regardless of the size of that campus organization, having that organization come together to make a joint statement, to talk to voters, whatever little thing you could do as a campus organization can multiply in dividends just because of the sheer amount of members that are listening and hearing what you're saying. So going back to your clubs and talking to them about exactly what's going on and how we can fight back, it's huge.
I definitely would agree with Jesse. Him and I have I'd like to say I'm very proud. I have 1,300 friends on Facebook. They've all heard my spiel a lot, and they're starting to tune out. But for those of y'all who have people that might not know about what's going on, it's really important that y'all share with them what is happening.
Hashtag voting rights for all.
Yes, with the hashtag voting rights for all. But it's really important that y'all make everybody know about what's going on. I can sit here and talk to Jesse until I'm blue in the face about what's happening, why this is such a bad thing for all of us. But if he's the only one that knows about it, then him and I are in trouble. We have to get this to the people who wouldn't normally know about this, who wouldn't normally vote, and who wouldn't normally care about these things, and say, your right to vote is being threatened. Make sure that you utilize that right and that you don't let them take it away from you. And that can be as simple as talking to your friends while you're hanging out. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to just in happenstance about what's going on. I picked up my computer from tech support today, and I pulled a bag of buttons out of my bag, and she said, "What are those buttons for?" And I said, "Well, have you heard about what's going on with voting rights here at Appalachian?" And we had a 10-minute conversation about it, and at the end of it, she took a button. And it's things like that. It's ways to talk to the people that we interact with on a daily basis that don't know what's going on, that allow us to expand the situation, that allow us to correct the situation. So I would just say, going out there, working to register voters. We'll be happy to plug you up with ways that you can talk to new people, that you can reach out to others.
And you don't have to be walking out, grabbing people as they're walking down. You can go to a classroom and register every single person in that classroom to vote. It doesn't have to be an aggressive thing for you to do. We have classrooms that are just itching to get registered right now, so we really need people to line up for that as well.
And as a side note, I know I graduated in May, but all of my classes last fall, I went and spoke to every single one of my professors and asked, as a nonpartisan idea, can I just bring in some voter registration forms? Just, let the students know, hey, you can register here. It's easier for you to vote here than get an absentee or drive all the way home. You can do it. Go ask your professors. A lot of them are very easy with it. They're okay with it. Take the first 5 minutes of class, get it knocked out, and it's totally all right. So don't hesitate to ask. It's a good thing. So.
Someone asked, what's the difference between this and gerrymandering?
Well, actually, they're very similar. Gerrymandering is drawing a district to kind of prevent people from voting. Instead of drawing the district, they're just putting the polling location on the far corner of the district, so nobody's interested in voting. So I guess you could say those are basically one and the same right now. They're one and the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so this will be our last question. I think it's a good way to wrap it up. So I guess it's two-part. Number one is this issue affecting is this affecting the country, affecting any other states in the country? And then the second part of this is, are you guys going to help other states in the same predicament? And how can we help other states as well?
Yeah, that was my question, because I've noticed that it's happening in Alabama and Texas this past summer, and I don't know why it's like in the southern areas. I didn't know if you guys are going to do something nationally or... So
I've got a few ideas about why it's in the South, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But there is this project that started in 2010, and it's called Red Map. And in this project, the Republicans laid out a plan, basically, how they're going to take over state legislatures, how they're going to take over governorships, and how they're going to take over judgeships. There was really low turnout in 2010, and they took all of those things. Now, the reason that they targeted those specific things was because, first of all, they wanted to pass voter ID in every single state house, and they did. All the ones you listed in the South, all of them have voter ID laws now. The second thing they wanted to do was make sure the governor couldn't veto it, because that was the other thing protecting us, was that we had Democratic governors. Well, they took all of them out. So they didn't veto the voter ID bills. Then they wanted to take the judges. So if we challenged voter ID in the courts, it would be ruled against. So after 2010, when they took over everything and had a massive strategy funded by billions of dollars just in the South, they decided that they would start implementing further laws, not just voter ID, but trying to make your parents pay more taxes if you decided to live here. Luckily, that didn't pass, but those are some of the tactics that they're using. And then, by taking governors, they took over the Board of Elections. So that strategy allowed them complete control over redrawing precincts, moving voting locations, making sure that voter ID was enforced, and if you paid attention to Montravius King, challenging voters and candidates for their right to vote. Montravius luckily won, but that could have gone either way. Being in with that meeting, 5 minutes before they made the decision, the board was almost in agreement that they should not let him run for candidacy. And it's not in North Carolina, it's not in Boone, it's not in Watauga County, it's all over the nation. And they have a great strategy to do that, but I hate that it's a great strategy for just plain voter suppression. So yes, we do have plans to make sure we export this model everywhere, not just North Carolina, everywhere. We have connections all over the nation that we want to use to make sure that people are aware of how we fought back. Watauga County is traditionally a very different area. We actually have more Republicans registered here than we do Democrats, but we have 55% unaffiliated. That means the majority of people here aren't interested in one party or the other, and I'm all right with that, I don't mind. I just want you guys to have the right to vote. So we get to try things that people pay attention to here. So we get to export the model that we had successfully ran and kind of tool it up to work in Alabama or tool it up to work in Tennessee. And yeah, we're gonna fight. We just need partners to join us in that fight. Ian?
You know, I definitely think that's it. You know, we have definitely focused on North Carolina. I know Montravius and I talked quite extensively about his fight in Elizabeth City, and you know, we've talked about what's going on here. And him and I were speaking on Monday before the State Board of Elections meeting, and he brought up to me that it is from the coast to the mountains in North Carolina. And I think that y'all brought up such a great point, or you brought up such a great point, that this is not just from the coast to the mountains, but it's around the country. And where we're fighting it right here, right now, we are going to be able to take this and fight it on a much larger scale, especially by working with different groups. You know, I know we've had the support of a lot of organizations, the NAACP of North Carolina, Democracy NC, Rock the Vote. I don't know if y'all have ever worked with them, but they've got a lot of great organizations, PERG as well as another one, that are teaming up, and they are getting out to stop this, not only here, but around the country. And I know, you know, I know we want to be a part of that. I know we want to assist them, and I know we want to help lead them into protecting voting rights for all people. And in the same way that we're organizing here, there are people organizing around this country, from the party to these nonprofit, nonpartisan organizations to everyday folks like y'all and like us. They're organizing and they're fighting this, and we can all join together to fight this holistically. And I think that is our biggest advantage.
Absolutely. So I'll quick. I know we're trying to wrap up, but I'll be quick here.